Everyone, this is the first YANA program in a series on the necessary relevance, the role of arts in society. I'm Rachel Littman, Yale class of 1991, the Executive Director of YANA. Thank you for joining us. We have a really interesting panel today representing a variety of different kinds of arts and cultural institutions. And we're lucky enough to have our program moderated by Dr. Akosua Barthwell Evans. Dr. Evans is the founder and chief executive officer of the Barthwell Group, which is a certified women-owned minority business management consulting firm in her hometown of Detroit. Dr. Evans has extensive experience in the private sector, as well as why we also tapped into her because of her experiences working with nonprofit organizations, including creating a diversity program at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. She's also very involved with Yale alumni groups, including the Yale Alumni Association Board of Governors, where she served for many years. She's also the president of the Yale Club of Michigan, and I could go on and on. She's a graduate of the Yale Law School and did her undergraduate work at Barnard. So I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Evans, who will be moderating and introducing our panel. And I will be sitting in the background watching Q&A or chat. If you have any questions that are particularly relevant, I will let Dr. Evans know. Otherwise, we should have ample time at the end to ask questions. So thanks again for joining us, and we hope to see you at future programs. Enjoy the conversation. Dr. Evans, it's all you.
Hi, thank you so much, Rachel. And it's really an honor to be present with such distinguished panelists today. You've received their bios with the notice for this meeting, but I am going to ask each one of them if they could just please take a minute or two and introduce themselves in terms of their name, title, the institution that they work with, and their Yale affiliation. So I'm going to start with Brian. You're on mute.
I haven't done this before. Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Hodge. I'm the executive director of the Printing Museum in Houston. I'm Yale class of 96, Stillman College. And I majored in art.
Thank you. Clement?
Hi, I'm Clement So, Silliman College 06. I'm the Director of Artistic Planning for the San Diego Symphony.
Thank you. Sarah?
Hi, everyone. So nice to be here. My name's Sarah Williams. I'm the Managing Director at California Shakespeare Theater in the Bay Area of California. I am class of 2015 at Yale School of Drama, where I got my master's in theater management.
Thank you so much, and so happy to have such a distinguished panel that represents many parts of our country. So first, I'm going to ask you a very simple question, but the answers, I think, will be very meaningful to many of our viewers today. Could you tell me what your institution focuses on, the focus of its work, and then explain how you came to work there, a little bit about your career journey. So Brian, I'm going to start with you.
Sure, thank you. The Printing Museum is a small community museum in Houston. We really champion the power and impact of printing arts on society. So if you come to the museum, we'll have galleries that feature rare manuscripts and antiquarian books, fine art facsimiles of things like the Gutenberg Bible, as well as vintage printing equipment, where you can, there are a few where you can print historic documents like the Declaration of Independence. We also have 4 book art studios where the public can come and learn the craft and also practice as well. How I came to this position and in my career, again, I studied art at Yale. I was surrounded by obvious lots of great art in the many museums on campus. I actually did work study at the University Art Gallery and the Peabody Museum. And I actually got my first introduction to letterpress printing with movable lead type in the Sterling Library. So I had a project, I had to create a book cover, and I wanted to use authentic metal type. And a friend of mine in Silliman worked there, and she knew how to use the equipment. She showed me how to do it, and I printed my project. And the rest is kind of history, but I've always been involved with museums. After I left Yale, my first job was at the Whitney Museum in New York City, doing graphic design, and I continue to consult with other museums as well. When I finally made it to Houston, I had heard about this printing museum, and they were like, "Oh, you should check it out." I did, and I was like totally in love with it, and started volunteering, eventually joined the board. And then during a leadership transition, I was asked to serve as interim executive director. And then I transitioned full-time executive director in January of this year.
Thank you. But Clement, how did you come to your position? What was your journey like? And tell us a little bit about the focus of your institution, the Symphony.
Sure. Well, I was a music major at Yale, music industry, but like many Yaleys, whether or not they majored in music, I was also very active performing. And when I was there, I conducted the Berklee College Orchestra. I really caught the conducting bug, but at the same time, I also sort of realized that what I wanted to do in life was not so much perform, but help others perform. You sort of be behind the scenes, putting together the show. So after Yale, I decided to go into arts administration. And before coming to San Diego, I was the artistic administrator at New York's 92nd Street Y for over a decade. Also helping to program and administer the concert series there, where and the focus there was more on classical music, definitely, but chamber size and recitals, but also jazz and American songbook series called Lyrics and Lyricists. And now at the San Diego Symphony, as the name implies, you know, I'm working primarily with an orchestra. Sorry, just my phone is ringing. Sorry about that. So the San Diego Symphony is a full-time orchestra based in San Diego. And like most orchestras, we play a lot of classical music. Our new music director is Rafael Payare. And we also do a lot of chamber music as well. But the thing that a lot of people might not know is that we also play a lot of what is known as pops. So that's basically things that are not classical music. So that may or may not involve the orchestra. That sometimes we have pop and rock groups, jazz groups with the orchestra together. Sometimes they are just performing alone. We also are in the process of building a new outdoor venue on San Diego Bay. So sort of, I like to think that as a cross between the Hollywood Bowl and the Sydney Opera House, where we will be holding lots of outdoor concerts. And we have a traditional summer series where we concentrate more on pops and non-classical concerts. So that in a nutshell is what I do.
Okay, thank you, Clement. Now, Sarah, your turn. Tell us a little bit about your work and the Shakespearean focus.
Sure thing. So as I mentioned, I'm the managing director at California Shakespeare Theater, also known as Cal Shakes. And I have been there for just a little bit over a year now. And, you know, I came to Cal Shakes from Berkeley Repertory Theater, where I was the associate managing director. So I had spent about 4 years in the Bay Area before taking on this position. And, you know, Cal Shakes is a classics theater. You know, of course, that means Shakespeare, but it also means other classic work. And yet it's also expanded. And I think that's one of the things that really drew me to the organization is this vision of the classics for the 21st century and what that looks like and how we as a classics theater engage in our contemporary moment. And so I would say for me, really the focus that Cal Shakes has shown in terms of its equity work, its work on diversity and inclusion, its commitment to becoming an anti-racist organization, which, you know, has only kind of deepened in this moment of the many pandemics that we're facing in this country are all values that I hold very dear, and reasons why, you know, coming to Cal Shakes felt like a really good choice for me. And so I would say that, you know, I think for me, I never thought I would run a classics theater. I left Yale School of Drama, which, you know, is the top drama program in the country, and thought I would move to New York like everyone else was doing, but had this opportunity to move out to California and work with a company that's really holding the values of equity high, and doing so at a theater that is also like really championing classic work, which is pretty cool.
Oh, thank you. We commend you for making that choice, and also for getting into the Yale School of Drama. It's very competitive.
Yes.
The next thing, as we alluded to previously, our country, unfortunately, is facing dual pandemics. So certainly the pandemic from the virus, but also the division and divisiveness in our country that seems to be so prevalent. So in light of all that, can you share with me how your institution, and perhaps how you personally, are dealing with these twin pandemics? I'll start with you, Clement.
Sure. So let's start with the COVID pandemic. That has really taken a ginormous toll on the performing arts. Because really the performing arts depends on being able to bring people close, literally close together. Audience, but especially for an orchestra, this is about bringing 80 people together on stage in close proximity for a long period of time. So it's really, we've had to really think about everything we do and find new ways of doing anything at all. I mean, that goes from having to put orchestra members further apart when they perform, also thinking about what spaces we're performing in, whether that's outdoors or indoors, you know, the quality of air filtering indoors. It even goes down to basic things like what do you have to do when you step in through the door of the building? And of course, because we can't have live audiences in California yet, we're still focusing a lot on delivering music via digital means. Another way of thinking about that is really we've sort of turned into a TV station or a media channel like Netflix in a way. We're just filming everything. And, you know, some days I feel like, you know, a bit like I'm learning how to be a TV producer like Liz Lemon on 30 Rock or something like that. But at the same time, because it's very hard to get people together, large numbers of people together performing music, we're also, you know, looking at other ways of doing music, whether that's musicians recording at home by themselves, doing some virtual ensemble performances, or maybe getting smaller groups of people together to do chamber music, you know, between 2 to 7 people. But we're also looking at talk-based programming. You know, we might not be able to play music so much all the time, but there's still value in having musicians talk about the music and love and why music matters still. So that's really to say, COVID is making us change how we do everything, but somehow still, you know, deliver our mission statement, which is, or you know, one of our basic beliefs is that music matters, and it's important for people to be able to listen to music. And in terms of the country's divisiveness at the pandemic there, first of all, let me say that this has, the classical music industry in particular has been coming to terms more and more in recent years, you know, with reckoning with the systemic racism inherent in an art form that's an import to America from Europe. And it's been a long time coming, and the San Diego Symphony, like virtually all our peers in the industry, are taking a really hard look at uncovering just what all those structures are, and figuring out what we can do to dismantle them as quickly and as much as possible. That, of course, being said, with structures, it is going to take a long time, and real change will not come about overnight and quickly. but that being said, I think this year in particular has given us extra urgency to move forward quicker. So for example, this summer, we've officially formed an EDI task force that I am part of. It was something that was about a while, and we were hoping to line up some fund to fund that activity because is bringing in an outside consultant to help us really guide the work and be efficient and help us, really be that outside person to make sure what we're doing is effective and good and following best practices. But we decided, given the urgency of what's happening in the world today, we just need to go ahead and start that work straight away, even if the funding wasn't there yet. We're continuing to go look for the funding, but that's beginning. And we're taking this opportunity to really take a hard look at everything we do internally, but also with a particular focus on how the various stakeholders behave with each other, what our interactions are. Really down to the level of, say, how our audience is being greeted when they step foot through the door of our concert hall. So it's really a thorough top to bottom approach, and we're focusing on the interactions between the humans who are all part of our musical community here in San Diego.
Dr. Evans, I think you need to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you. That just reminds me of some experiences that I've had with symphonies, and I'm blanking on the name of the program, but I know one of the principal's name is Dworkin, his last name, and it's a program to develop the pipeline of conductors and other performers with symphonies. I think that's very, very meaningful and something that we all need to address. Now, Sarah, tell me, with Shakespeare, and given this time, it might be very challenging to demonstrate like the relevance of what you're doing to these twin pandemics. How are you doing that?
It is a question that I think keeps me up a bit at night, but I'm quite grateful to be at Cal Shakes, where I feel like we have, just the competencies to start to wade into that exact question. I would say that since both the forced closure that the health pandemic brought on to our industry, to the theater industry, to the performing arts, to our country, to the world, coupled with the cry for racial equity in our country, we've just been wrestling with everything, right? It's kind of just laid bare the vulnerabilities of what it means to be a nonprofit theater in the United States. The business model has been totally disrupted. The structures and the systems that we've built up our profession on have been revealed in ways not suddenly. I mean, these are all things that we've been having conversations with in the field for years now, but the revelation of just being built on these white supremacist structures and in these systems. And, I think artists in particular, they're forward thinkers. We're forward thinkers, right? That's why I want to support artists, because they're always pushing us further in terms of the culture and using culture to create change. And so as a classics theater, as a Shakespeare theater, I feel very lucky to have a partner in my artistic director, Eric Ting, who has a vision for theater that is equitable, right? That can be said that we are on a journey towards becoming an anti-racist, multicultural institution, even also at the same time holding the fact that, our history is such that we are a Shakespeare theater. And while we love and, really, I think hold true the importance of Shakespeare in our culture and his writing and his genius and everything that comes along with it, there's this other thing that we hold too, which is just all the problematic elements of how we hold up Shakespeare as to be, the premier kind of writer in the world, and what that means as a white man who is writing at a very different time culturally. So at our organization, one of the things we've been doing, I would say, is trying to hold multiple things simultaneously, which I think as humans, we're not always the best at, but we're trying. And then really looking to find ways to continue to bring people together collectively, which is what, we pride ourselves on being able to do as theater makers, is to be able to sit in a space together and to see a story and to, be able to listen in a way and to see and walk in someone else's shoes. And so we can't necessarily all come together, physically, but we are putting on a series of conversations that we're calling our Direct Address series. And the first topic was allyship and anti-racism, and how can we as theater makers and as artists approach this conversation that we're having, nationally, and how can we as artists talk about these really hard conversations together with our audiences, with other artists, with art makers. We're also right in the beginning of a series called Resisting Shakespeare, which is exactly about this kind of tension that I was talking about of, the history and legacy of Shakespeare, but also how we, continue to uplift the amazingness that is Shakespeare. And we're doing all of that virtually, which is, we have the technology to be able to do that. As Clement said, we're learning how to be TV producers on the fly, but really kind of finding ways into this contemporary moment and to have that conversation as artists and people committed to the arts.
Thank you. And Brian, I'm going to ask you the same questions, but something else that I think we should really address a little bit is affordability, because often with some institutions, that is a barrier to some in terms of just the admission price. I know some museums, I've been on the trustee committee for MoMA for many years. And there's different experiments with making the price available to everyone, as at the Detroit Historical Society, where I'm a board member. In Detroit, as part of the millage, there is open admission to many of these museums. But how are you dealing first with the two pandemics, Brian, and what about affordability?
Well, the COVID pandemic obviously forced us to close for a period of time. It ended up being 2.5 months. Texas Governor Abbott allowed museums to be in the first phase of reopening. So that was like May 1st or something. We thought that was crazy. So we decided to kind of wait and see how things were playing out, how the new cases were tracking. And eventually we decided to open in early June. We opened June 11th with just general admission. I would say though that our museum is, I wouldn't say unique, but it really does require activation. You really benefit from an interactive tour led by a docent or a tour guide. We have interactive stations, again, that are guided. You can't have the public on the machines themselves because they can be a hazard to people who don't know how to use them. So those exhibits are still closed. We've also had workshops, in-person group workshops that we've had to cancel. But recently we have started to do virtual programming. So we just had our first virtual workshop. We had people on 3 continents in multiple time zones. It was amazing. I would have never thought a year ago that would be possible. So, it's one of the kind of blessing curses of COVID is that, forced us to go digital and embrace digital technology faster than we would have. We're also in the process of, digitizing our collection. We realize, in person is great, but we could reach a broader community of supporters and enthusiasts if we put our stuff online. Even just basic things like exhibitions on our website, expanding that. And then I would say, in terms of affordability, we are mindful of affordability. Our general admission is pretty affordable. It's $8 for adults, $5 for students. We also are thinking about free days during the month. And with COVID, trying to do contactless transactions, whether online or in person with credit cards, not handling cash and all that. We found that to be necessary, but I also realized that, like, what about for communities that aren't banked, like that don't carry plastic? How does that impact them? So, these are all things we're trying to juggle, and hopefully when things return to semi-normal, we can, again, start accepting cash and expand our free days to make it more accessible to communities. And in terms of our response to kind of the divisiveness, the death of George Floyd really impacted Houston. He's a Houston native, and it was all over the news here. And over the weekend, one of the weekends, I was just like, what can we do? What can we do as a museum? I didn't want to do some performative thing on social media, changing our profile pic or making some statement, because in looking through our past programming, we've had very diverse programming from including indigenous artists, underrepresented artists. So I was just thinking to myself, what can I do? And I said, well, what do we have? We have printing presses and we have paper. So we can print things. We can print protest posters or demonstration posters. So I reached out to Black Lives Matter Houston organization and offered it up. They were very welcoming. They were like, yeah, that'd be great. I'm like, but don't y'all have a demonstration, like a march, like tomorrow? And so I kind of had to push it, and we set something up and sent them a proof, and they were like, yeah, can we have a whole bunch? I was like, sure. So we were printing into the night so that we could have posters available for the next day. We went and distributed them there at the park where it started. And it was, generally a very positive thing. And in that process, we realized that more people wanted to print things. And we were like, well, let's open up the museum. Like, we can't have groups, but single individuals can come and print anything they want. They just have to help. So people signed up through Facebook to print personally meaningful words. And we do still have some copies of the posters out front in our lobby. So that's been our response. Our team is very progressive. We're actively and always thinking about ways to just be more inclusive and equitable in what we do.
That's very important, and such inspirational examples of how you're not just making a statement, but actually serving the community in a very meaningful way. And I think that kind of brings us to another question that may be on the minds of some. A lot of times when we think about art in this country, unfortunately, I think, we think of it more as something that's peripheral. It's not really central to us. It's something that may be something we consider on the side. And so for some, it may even be considered somewhat of a luxury, something that's not for the everyday person, but something which might be more for people of greater means that may have more time, more leisure to participate. So Sarah, what do you do to kind of make the ordinary person in the public see a connection between your institution and their lives? Another way of asking, how do you make them feel more comfortable when, for many people, going to a Shakespeare festival may not be something that they've considered or experienced before? So how do we make that equitable argument more?
I feel like that is the journey of my career, right? Like that is the goal of what I've set out to do, because I've found a place in the arts, and I've always, for me, it's been a place of belonging, but I know that is not the reputation that it has in our country, at least. And I think part of that is perception, right? Like the way that we have professionalized the arts industry, and the business model on which it rests requires, certain ticket prices or, benefactors of certain donor levels, and the way we've kind of cultivated this, I would say, perception of what it means to be, you know, involved in the arts, or to think of the arts as important, or arts and culture, or whatever. But I would say actually what I do is I lift up stories. And everyone's a storyteller. Human beings are storytellers by nature. And so storytelling doesn't go away. We all tell stories as part of our everyday lives. And I think what we try to do at Cal Shakes is connect those stories to the lived experiences of the communities that we find ourselves in, and to build really, you know, authentic, which is a problematic word, I think, sometimes right now. So forgive me for using it, but no, I use it with only the best intentions, but to build collaborative and meaningful and intentional relationships with your communities in a way that lifts up their lived experiences, which is a way of sharing and participating in arts and culture. You don't have to go and get dressed up and spend a lot of money to participate in the arts. The arts are happening on our street corners, in the subways, stations, you know, in our classrooms, in our homes. And I think it's just a little bit about decoupling some of the perceptions that have grown up around how we think about the arts in this country. And that's one of the goals that I'm working towards by being a leader in the arts. I feel a sense of responsibility that someone who looks like me, that looks like all of us on the screen, are in positions of leadership in arts organizations, that we're kind of continuing to lift culture up as something that is inherent to our society. I was on a webinar the other, I don't know, what is time, many months ago, probably at this moment, in which Kwame Kwe-Arma, who's the artistic director of the Young Vic in London, he used to be the artistic director of Baltimore Center Stage and is a visionary beyond me, but he said something to the ilk of civilizations are judged by culture. Right? When we look back at historic civilizations, we think about the pyramids the Egyptians built, or we think about Shakespeare, right? And so yes, of course, there's policy and there's government and there's all of those many things, but there's also the culture that we as humans, I think, remember and look to as signs of like effective and vibrant civilizations. And so for me, that's what I hold on to when people say that arts are peripheral, or people say that arts don't have a, you know, aren't important, or whatever they may say. I think about how effective culture makers are making effective change in our country. And so that's really motivating to me, and what I hold on to and what I look to align myself to as we build programming at Cal Shakes and in the other organizations that I've worked in, other organizations I support, and just kind of living as a human in this world.
Thank you, and your enthusiasm just resonates with all of us, and we can see your passion, which is so important. And Clement, if I were asking you a similar question, because for many, a symphony experience can be perceived as something that is more for persons of means. Obviously, there are different ways you can bring people to the symphony earlier so that they become accustomed and they are able to experience it. So how do you address that same kind of issue of making certain that art is something that we begin to think of as important and part of our daily lives, as opposed of just thinking, it's something I do or experience if I have extra time, but it has nothing to do with my daily life. How do you address that?
Sure. That's a really great question, and something that I've always struggled with, because it's really inherent to the form of classical music. And I say classical maybe meaning in a wider sense of music without words or any reference to the real world. You know, music isn't inherently about anything. It doesn't inherently refer to things in the world. And for me, I think one way I've always tried to make music relevant, you know, when not just this year, but in all times, is somehow be able to give it a context and connect it to something that is happening in the world, something that is part of a human experience. But at the same time, that's a very fine balancing act to not also turn that into a, say, a music history 101 lecture, you know. So I'll give you an example, because I think this might help illustrate what I tried to do. So of course, during the pandemic, we couldn't have ensemble music. So we had a program with solo pieces that were pre-recorded from home. And one of the pieces our principal flutist recorded and played for us was a piece by a living composer called Alison Loggins Hull. For solo flute. There are no words to it, but in this program, I had a brief interview with Alison where I asked her about the genesis of the piece and sort of the meaning of the title of the piece, which is Homeland. And this piece was written back in 2018, and for the composer, the word homeland really was meant to evoke questions of what does it mean when your home is destroyed by human disasters, natural disasters. And she was inspired by the Civil War and the refugee crisis happening in Syria at the time. And also Hurricane Maria, closer to home in Puerto Rico. So really it was a deeply nostalgic and unsettled questioning of what does it mean to be home. And of course, this year, it also takes on particular resonances of homeland and patriotism. And what does it mean that Black citizens of America are still disenfranchised and treated as less than full citizens, or treated or otherized? How does one feel, have to live in a country that is they're born in and that they doesn't feel completely like home? So I bring up this example as a way that music without words can have resonances with everyday life. That is not to say that, you know, all classical music can have that same resonance. You know, it's a different story to say, you know, how does Mozart's Symphony No. 25 resonate and be relevant to life in America in 2020? And that's the subject of a much longer conversation. But I offer that as an example of a way where music without words can be relevant and still meaningful.
A very poignant example. It reminds me of a book when, I guess in my college experience, Beyond the Melting Point, that melting pot, that makes the same kind of argument about how African Americans often are the last to experience the kind of integration in a substantive sense, and the quote assimilation, not meaning giving up our culture, but being accepted as an American. So Brian, I think you also have given already some great examples of how you are really engaging with the community. Yet and still, for many, going to a museum is not something that we do every day. And having been on the trustee committee on education at MoMA for many years and the founder of the Friends of Education at MoMA, we're very aware that people often just aren't comfortable coming into a museum, or that we feel that, you know, is this someplace that wants me here? Is this something that can be part of my everyday life? So how have you kind of operationalized and made the experience of the important work you're doing something that is not considered peripheral?
Right. Yeah, so one of the challenges with the printing museum is, you know, you say, oh, you work at the printing museum. They're like, well, why do you have a museum for printing? Because isn't printing dead, you know? No, it's still very much alive. But what we try to show in our museum is like really like kind of like the broad application of the technology. So, you know, from obviously there's a commercial side and, you know, newspapers and media and journalism, but there's also a creative side with, you know, fine artists who use the medium to create lithographs or, you know, silk screen art. So we really try to present as much kind of as diverse presentation of printing as possible. In our permanent collection, though, we do have a very Eurocentric and kind of colonial American theme running through it, and like the impact that it's had on society. So we're very cognizant of that, even though a lot of the important innovations happened in Asia and from Islamic cultures. So we are applying for funding to reinterpret our galleries to have more inclusivity in the story and the development of printing, both as an art and commerce. So that's what we're trying to do. And we're also just really trying to be welcoming as possible. And I know this is crazy, but in our museum, there's a lot of text, you know, like, you know, you have, you know, images that you have, and, you know, historic newspapers from around the world, and there's just a lot of copy to read, and sometimes it's very small, but like just putting in chairs, putting in benches so people can have a place to sit and read or to ponder things. We also have magnifying glasses in one gallery because the point size is so small. It's impossible to read with, you know, especially mature eyes that I have now. But we are also innovating some programs, things we haven't done. I really believe, I love this place. I'm like, my kids should love it too, but it's not really welcoming for them. So we started doing once a month, I think it was like second Saturdays, we started before COVID, Family Fun Studio. So where kids could do basic printmaking. There's an origami table and there's a book arts table where we instruct them on how to make book structures. And I thought that, oh, this is like, if, you know, our museum is great for people who can read. So like ages 6 and up, but we had families come in with 3-year-olds, and 3-year-olds can do it with the help of their parents, of course. So we're starting to see like, you know, this is not a reading only institution, and a way to make it more impactful and meaningful to people is to really just kind of show them how they can use these tools and technology in their everyday life to create something, you know, create a book that they can then sketch in or write, you know, a diary of sorts. So.
Thank you. Now, you've all kind of indicated with a lot of passion what you're doing for others, what you're doing for your communities, how you're making your institutions more accessible, creating a sense of belonging. So this is tying in with a question from the audience as well. What can people listening today do to help support your work? And I'll start with you, Brian.
I'm going to do the shameless plug. Of course, you can support us directly by going to our website, making a donation, or becoming a member. We do have members across the country. We do offer, with COVID, we've been offering virtual tours. So a lot of it is demonstrations, so you can see how things are done. We have some things coming up where like we'll print thank you cards and we'll send you a pack. Also, we're doing one with book plates. So you can get personalized book plates. If you register in advance, you'll see me print them, and then we'll ship you off a set of like 20 or 25 or so. But I would also say there are a lot of book art centers around the country. So if you can't make it to the Printing Museum, there are book art centers almost in every major city. And so I'd urge you to support them. We often share programming and ideas. Also, I would say, you know, share your love and knowledge of books and art. That's the most important thing you can do for us. Like, the more people are interested in reading, interested in words, and interested in art, you know, more places like the Printing Museum, which may be off the beaten path, you know, the more it benefits us.
I'm sorry, what a gracious answer of not only how we can support you, but how we can support other institutions as well. So Clement, what would you say? What can people listening in do to support your work?
I have a similar answer to Brian. Of course, donating money, your time, also advocating for better funding and better visibility of the arts is key. You know, COVID is just taking a ginormous economic toll on everyone in the arts. But I also think part of it is advocating for listening and being active participants in art. And that's for yourself, also advocating to people around you and also advocating it and for future generations. So I'm really talking about children and education. And I think, similar to what Brian was saying, it is important to encourage people to go take in arts, go ask what does art mean, go talk about it. Yes, part of art is simply, you know, the pleasure of, say, going to a concert for 2 hours, doing something fun. But as I've been talking about, I think there's meaning behind it as well. And if we can begin to talk about what art means, why people create arts, how art affects me, how it touches me, even if it's only in a very abstract or, say, emotional manner, that is an important part of making the case of why art is not just a luxury or a leisure activity. There's meaning behind it, and that is hard work. I am fully aware that, you know, art doesn't really fall into the lower levels of Maslow's pyramids of needs. For example, you know, it doesn't directly put a roof over your head or feed you, but I would say that art feeds the soul in a maybe a deeper sense. And if more people can have those conversations and put art as a need to be a human, then I think that could really help make a much stronger case of why art matters for us.
So Sarah, we've heard from others, both in terms of supporting sister institutions, kind of making art something more universally appreciated, and also pragmatically how we can support your particular institution, because we know not only for many institutions of art or culture, there are great financial challenges given restrictions about attendance, things like that. But also the artists, performers, members of the symphonies, etc., may also be facing economic challenges and other challenges. So Sarah, how would you answer the question, what can those listening do to be supportive of your work?
Sure. Well, I would say definitely do the things Clement and Brian have offered, have invited you all to do. And then, you know, I think the past however many months it's been since the pandemic has forced this pause in many of our industries and in our lives, have been incredibly hard. That's not even, I think, an accurate phrase to describe what many of us are holding. But I also think in my lighter days that this is a moment of opportunity for all of us in our country to do better, to be better in our industries, and as people who work in the arts and people who appreciate the arts and people who support the arts in our society, which is all of us here in this Zoom room. You know, I think this moment of opportunity is one that demands change and demands risk-taking. And so I think as civic institutions, which all of us are, institutions that are here for the public good, that our communities have a responsibility to demand more of all of us, to be to be innovative, to be taking risks, to be finding ways to be more accessible, to be experimenting with ways that we can build and increase our audiences, to be looking to us as organizations and as institutions to be trying new things. And, you know, we're not going backwards in time. We're not going back to the way things used to be. We can only move forward from here. And so we have a responsibility as arts workers and artists and culture makers to be moving forward in a way that will make us better as humans and better as a society and better as a culture. And so that to me feels like something that people can do, which is to really demand more of your cultural institutions, support them by asking them to kind of reach beyond our comfort level, because this is a moment that allows us to do that, and to support them along the way, to be actively involved in conversation with them, to follow them on their social media and to support them monetarily, but also to like be in true conversation relationship with the cultural organizations in your community. That feels like a really important opportunity of this moment. And I would also say individually, to plug my own institution, you know, I mentioned our direct address series. I invite you all to check that out on the CalShakes website, calshakes.org, because I think it's a pretty incredible way of highlighting, you know, the fact that we're all on this journey together, and a really powerful example of how a cultural organization can participate in our national dialogue.
Thank you. Just one final question. We just have a couple of minutes left. So we're talking about change, but for some, change is not comfortable. So as you are striving to kind of change how your institutions are perceived, the roles they're playing, maybe taking a stronger stance on racial and socioeconomic equity and inclusion, have you had to address those who may not feel comfortable with that type of change? I'll just throw that out and one or two of you can answer because we're reaching close to our time.
I mean, I'll just pop in because I've been very passionate about this moment being a moment for change and opportunity. And yeah, it's super discomforting. I think, you know, this moment asks us to make choices about what we will choose to do with our resources and what we won't choose to do with our resources. And that can be very challenging and very discomforting. And when so many of us are struggling, I think it can be incredibly hard to have to sit down and have a conversation with a donor who doesn't like the direction you're going in, for instance, or doesn't appreciate, you know, kind of the stronger stance that your organization, that the organization is taking. And so I think that what I've been trying to do personally is get a little bit better about leaning into that discomfort and really trying to find that human connection as a starting place, right? Because we might not fully agree on everything, and that could be where the conversation leads you to, but it also could be a moment to try to understand where someone else is coming from. So I would just say that it can be incredibly hard, and it keeps me up at night, some of these conversations, but it also feels like what needs to happen.
Thanks. Anyone else quickly? We just have a couple of minutes left. Brian, did you want to say something?
I would just say that, you know, I was reading some of the questions and the funding community here has been very supportive generally of, you know, equity and inclusion efforts as it relates to, you know, kind of this season. But I would say we have to hold them accountable. Like, you know, just don't say you care, like demonstrate it, like, you know, put money on the table. And I think, you know, I've sat in workshops with arts administrators and arts consultants who happen to be Caucasian, and they're like, well, what should we do? What should we say? I just don't know what to say. And I'm like, well, you know, you have the ear of foundations. You should demand that they put, more teeth behind what they're doing. And, you know, I don't know, I think in the arts, I can't imagine someone would really be kind of anti just the broader goals of diversity, because it's always, you know, in most governance, you know, situations and in discussions we have on a board level, it's like, it's always, we don't have enough of these people. We want to get the African American community to the printing museum, and it's an underrepresented group in terms of attendees. We need to have African Americans on the board, you know, you need to have African Americans on the staff. You need to engage with them and really, instead of having a top-down approach, you know, let's ask the community what they want. So I don't really see, I mean, if there are some issues, if there are people are uncomfortable, I think we need to be uncomfortable. We need to have uncomfortable conversations to push it forward, because if we don't, nothing's going to happen.
Thank you. Clement, was there anything you wanted to add at this time? Okay. So I want to thank each and every one of you, not only for your time today, but for your important work that you do. Because sometimes the work is appreciated and sometimes it isn't, frankly, but it's something that makes our society and our country a much better place. And I firmly believe that through the arts, we will bring about a greater sense of unity in our country and more common ground. So I applaud each of you. I admire you. It's been a real honor to have the opportunity to participate in this panel as a moderator. And I hope everyone, I've already taken some notes about how I can support you and things you're offering. And I hope others in the audience will do the same. So I thank you very much. And Rachel, I didn't know if you wanted to, I want to thank YANA, obviously, for hosting us and for having this very important series. Rachel, thank you.
Thank you all. I'm almost speechless when we talk about, I just was looking behind you, Brian, it says, trust your guts. I actually feel you guys hit me in my gut. I mean, this is like beyond, it's met expectations of what I would hope a conversation among really smart, driven Yaleys or anybody interested would do. But you guys, you're passionate about what you do. You're really thoughtful about, and Dr. Evans, thank you. So the questions were beautiful, and you can bring in your own experience. And I hope our audience is looking at some of the questions we've had from folks in the comments, is that everybody appreciates what you're doing. We will certainly share resources. So we'll make sure when we do the follow-up video that we have a links to your institutions, and if there's anything else you want us to let the world know about, let us know, including other, and thank you, Brian and others, for mentioning, there's other museums, there's other printing organizations, there are funders, we've covered some foundations before, so this is the chance to do this. So thank you again for all that you do, and I hope people will return, including our panelists here. We've got several more programs coming up on these topics of the necessary relevance of arts. And I think, Dr. Evans, you really kind of teased it out of everyone beautifully about, how is what we do, or what you guys do, so much a part of life and fabric, and how can we help expand that through the generations and through the communities. And I'm really touched, so thank you. We're going to explore a couple other areas in which arts may not be thought about so much. We've got incarceration reentry programs that have to do with drama, and we've got obviously the role of music in religion and sacred ritual. We're going to be bringing in some people from arts healing, for mental and health healing. There's so many other places that sometimes, obviously we started with the traditional, but we're going to move to some other areas. And then a lot of what you guys touched on, we're going to cover in the new year, kind of the idea of public art, who's supposed to fund this, how are they supported? And then, of course, we don't want to forget the actual individual artists themselves. We were spending a lot of time on the institutions, so I hope we will come back and continue these conversations. Thank you, everyone. Best of luck. You guys give till it hurts and support these kinds of arts institutions. And I wish you guys all the best of luck, and we'll see you again in another YANA program. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.